canal to the other. The correct answer here is definitely option B. The next slide. What type of digestion occurs in the mouth of humans? Now, we know we have two types of digestion. We have mechanical digestion, we have chemical digestion. Mechanical digestion is when the food substances are just broken down into smaller pieces without any enzyme acting on it. Chemical digestion is when enzymes begin to act on the food substances and break them down to smaller pieces. And in the mouth, both of them are happening. In the mouth, chewing is going on. When we begin to chew, what are we doing? We are breaking out the food into smaller pieces. That's mechanical digestion. Don't forget, also in the mouth, there is saliva, and there's an enzyme present in the saliva called what? The thiolane. What does thiolane? What does it do? It converts starch to maltose. So in the human mouth, two types of digestion occurs. The mechanical digestion, which is carried out by the teeth, as the teeth breaks down the food particles, and then chemical digestion, which is carried out by the thiolane, when it converts starch in the carbohydrate to maltose. So the correct answer will be both mechanical and chemical digestion, which is option C. And talking about digestion, they can give you different categories of food, and they ask you that which one of them will digest fastest. Carbohydrate digest fastest, followed by protein. Fat and oil digest slowest. Let me say that again. If you are given certain categories of food and they ask you that which of the following food substances will digest fastest in the human body, all you have to do is look for which one of them is the carbohydrate. Carbohydrate digest quickest, followed by protein. The food substance that digests slowest is fat and oil. And don't forget, carbohydrates, what are the elements it contains? Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And what does it do? It supplies energy to the body, right? And then we have three types of them. We have the monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are those ones that cannot be broken down into smaller pieces. We have three types of monosaccharides: glucose, fructose, and galactose. And the three of them have the same molecular formula: 6,6H12O6. And then we have disaccharides. Even as the name suggests, disaccharides are those carbohydrates that are made up of two monosaccharides. And we have three types of them as well. We have maltose. Maltose is made up of two molecules of glucose. We have sucrose. Sucrose is made up of what? Glucose and fructose. And then we have lactose, which is present in milk. We call it milk sugar, which is made up of glucose and galactose. And of course, we have the polysaccharide, the one that contains large amount of monosaccharides. We have cellulose, the polysaccharide. We have glycogen, it's a polysaccharide. We have starch, it's a polysaccharide. We have chitin, what we call chitin. Chitin, don't forget, chitin is present in the cell wall of fungi, is a polysaccharide. We also have chitin in the exoskeleton of arthropod. That is what is shed off during molting of ecdysis. So let's move ahead to slide 3. What is the role of potassium in plants? This is under animal nutrition. You know that we have two major types of nutrients in plants. We have the micronutrients or microminerals. Those are the ones that are needed only in small quantity. They are called trace elements, all right? And then we have the macro, which ones are required in large quantity. The macro ones are nitrogen, iron, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, and so on and so forth. Now, the micro ones are the ones like zinc, like copper, like boron, like manganese, molybdenum, and so on and so forth. But potassium is needed majorly for activation of enzymes. So the major function of potassium in plants is enzyme activation. If you look at option A, cell wall formation, that's the function of calcium. It is calcium that is responsible for formation of cell wall in plants. If you look at chlorophyll formation, there are three elements that aid in formation of chlorophyll in plants. nitrogen, magnesium, and iron. It's a very common question as well. Let me say that again. The three elements necessary for formation of chlorophyll in plants are Mg, magnesium, nitrogen, and iron. And that is why whenever any of these three elements that are necessary for formation of chlorophyll is deficient, it will cause what we refer to as chlorosis. Chlorosis. Because there are a lot of questions, they can ask you that deficiency of which of the following elements causes chlorosis in plants. Chlorosis is simply a word that means yellowing of the leaves. When leaves of plant, don't forget, leaves of plant are supposed most of the time to be greenish in color. But when they become yellow, you call it chlorosis. And the three elements whose deficiency cause chlorosis are magnesium, iron, and of course, nitrogen. And if you come to option D, protein synthesis, the element that is necessary for protein synthesis is nitrogen. Even if you remember, there are usually minimum of 5 elements in nitrogen: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sometimes phosphor, sulfur, or phosphorus. So once again, option A, cell wall formation. That's calcium. Calcium is necessary for formation of cell wall. What about option C? Chlorophyll production, magnesium, nitrogen, and iron. And option D, protein synthesis. The element needed for that is nitrogen. Another question you could encounter is they can ask you, which of the following elements is deficient during poor root development? When there is poor root development, the deficiency of element that causes that is calcium. So which means that calcium is necessary for formation of cell wall and also development of roots. Please, let's take it up that. Yes. What? Lactulose? No, it's not your syllabus. Well, someone is asking about lactulose. Lactulose is another example of disaccharide, even though it is not a JAMB syllabus. But if you want to know it, by the way, lactulose is different from lactose. Lactose is made up of glucose and galactose, but lactulose is made up of fructose and galactose. That's the difference between them. So please take note of that. The next slide. Okay, which of the following is an example of nitrogen fixing bacteria? Now, in the nitrogen cycle, there are some bacteria that help in fixing gaseous nitrogen into the soil in form of nitrates. And these bacteria are divided into two. You have symbiotic nitrogen fixing bacteria. You have non-symbiotic nitrogen fixing bacteria. The example of symbiotic nitrogen fixing bacteria, that is, those bacteria that live symbiotically at the root nodules of leguminous plants to fix nitrates into the soil, is called rhizobium. An example of a symbiotic nitrogen fixing bacteria is rhizobium, whereas an example of a non-symbiotic nitrogen fixing bacteria is Asobacter. So both rhizobium and Asobacter are involved in nitrogen fixation. So if you look at the option, the correct answer here is option C, both rhizobium A and B, Asobacter. The next slide. Okay, which of the following is the first step in nitrogen fixation in plant? Now, nitrogen fixation in plant takes place through a lot of series. As a matter of fact, you guys are aware about the various stages involved in nitrogen fixation. We have nitrification, ammonification, denitrification, and so on and so forth. But the very first step in nitrogen fixation is when a particular enzyme that is referred to as nitrogenase starts that particular activity. So the enzyme nitrogenase actually begins, kickstarts the nitrogen cycle. So the correct answer here is nitrogenase activity. Nitrogenase is an enzyme that starts and begins the nitrogen cycle. Another thing you need to know is this: nitrogen is lost from the soil only through one process. And what do you call that? What particular process? Denitrification. And what is denitrification? A process whereby nitrates in the soil are converted to nitrogenous gas and then they are lost into the atmosphere. Not only that, they can also ask you that which of the following factor encourages denitrification. That is, which factor can make nitrates in the soil to be converted to gaseous nitrogen and then lost in the process to the atmosphere. The major factor that encourages denitrification is low soil oxygen. When the amount of oxygen in the soil is very low, that will encourage a lot of denitrifying bacteria to begin to convert nitrate in the soil to gaseous nitrogen. Let me say that again. The major factor that encourages denitrification is low soil oxygen. So that's for that. The next slide. Which of the following diseases is caused by a protozoan? If you look at option A, tuberculosis, tuberculosis is not caused by a protozoan, it's caused by a bacterium, and the name is called tuberculobacilli. From the word bacilli, you know it is a type of bacterium that is rod-like in shape. Because that's another question common in JAM. Bacteria are classified based on their shapes. Any bacterium that has rod-like shape, it is called a bacillus. A bacterium that is having a comma shape, it is called a vibrio, V-I-B-R-I-O. A bacterium that is spiral in shape is called a spirulate. A bacterium that is corkscrew in shape is called a spirochete. A bacterium that is spherical in shape is called a cocci. So we have two types of cocci. We have streptococci and then we have staphylococci. Some exist in clusters and some exist in long chains. So if you look at option A here, so that we don't waste too much time, option A, tuberculosis is not caused by protozoan, it's caused by a bacterium called tuberculobacilli. Option C, hepatitis. Hepatitis is a disease that affects the liver. It is caused by virus, not by a protozoan. We look at option D. Option D is a very infectious disease, also caused by a virus. So the correct answer here is option B, malaria. Malaria is caused by a particular protozoan called Plasmodium falciparum. And the vector of malaria parasite is what we refer to as female Anopheles mosquito. Another thing you need to know is there are two stages during the life cycle of the Plasmodium parasite. There is the endoerythrocytic stage and then there is the exoerythrocytic stage. The exoerythrocytic stage is spelled like this. Because these are questions common in JAM. The exoerythrocytic stage in the life cycle of malaria parasite occurs in the liver. All right? The exoerythrocytic stage in the life cycle of malaria parasite occurs in the liver, while the endoerythrocytic stage in the life cycle of malaria parasite occurs in the red blood cell. Is that understood? Another question they can ask you is, there are various stages of malaria parasite. There is the sporocyte stage, the trophocyte stage, merocyte, and so on and so forth. They can ask you that which of the following stages of malaria parasite is the infective stage. That's the stage that actually infects. That is the merocyte stage. So please take note of that. The next slide. The next slide. Okay. Which of the following is not a characteristic of viruses? Now, viruses are very interesting microorganisms. What made them interesting is the fact that they have characteristics that are in between living and non-living things. Number one, viruses are acellular. What does it mean, acellular? They are not cell, they don't have cell. So if you look at this, option D, they do not have a cellular structure. That's correct. But look at the question saying, which of the following is not a characteristic? All right. One of the characteristics of a virus is they don't have a cellular structure, they are acellular. Another characteristic of viruses is that they cannot independently reproduce on their own. For a virus to reproduce, it needs a living host. A virus cannot reproduce on its own. It needs to be inside a living host before it can reproduce. So if you look at the option and you look at option B, they can reproduce independently. That will be the correct answer here because that is not true. Viruses cannot reproduce independently. They can only reproduce when they are present in the body or in the cell of a living host. And that's actually what you have in option C. They require a host cell to reproduce. So the correct answer here, which is not true about viruses, is they can reproduce independently. They cannot. They need a living host before they can reproduce. The correct answer here is option B. Let's go to the next slide. Which of the following is an example of a density independent factor? Now, there are two major factors that affect microorganisms in habitat. We have density dependent factors, we have density independent factor. Now, forget about how it sounds. What does it mean? Now, if you say density dependent factor, it means that the higher the magnitude of that particular factor, the higher the mortality rate. What's the meaning of that? It means that when that particular factor is high, higher number of organisms will die because that's the meaning of mortality rate. And that is why we call them density dependent. But if it is density independent, it means that regardless of that particular factor, the magnitude of the factor, organism will die irrespective of either it is much or low. For example, diseases is an example of density dependent factor. The more severe the disease, the higher the amount of organisms that die. Predation is an example of density dependent factor. The higher the amount of predation, what do we call predation? The higher the amount of predator that kill organisms, the higher the number of organisms that will die. That's understood now? So competition is another example. The higher the amount of competition among organisms, the higher the amount of organisms that can actually die because of inability to have access to resources. But if you look at flood, drought, and so on and so forth, they are examples of density independent factor. So the correct answer here would be option C, which is flooding. The next slide. Okay, what does the term biotic potential refer to? Very simply, biotic potential is the maximum number of offspring that an organism can give birth to in a species. That's all. That's what a biotic potential is about. Once again, a biotic potential is the maximum, the highest number of offspring that an organism can give birth to within a species or population. So if you take a look at the option A, the maximum number of offspring a species can produce, that's the correct answer. So whenever you see biotic potential, it's talking about what is the maximum number that a particular species of organism can produce within a particular area. That is biotic potential. But if it is just biotic factor, those are living factor. What about the factor? Example, diseases are biotic factor, competition, biotic factor, predation, biotic factor, and so on and so forth. But if you say a biotic factor, the way you call it, a biotic factor, these are non-living factors in an ecosystem. Rainfall is a biotic. What about relative humidity, pressure, hydrogen ion concentration, salinity, wind, and so on and so forth. But The question here is on biotic potential, the maximum number of offspring that a species can produce or form in a particular place or population. The next slide. Okay, what will likely happen if a population exceeds a carrying capacity? First things first, what is the carrying capacity of a particular ecosystem? The carrying capacity is the highest number, the maximum number of organisms that can be supported with adequate resources in a particular habitat. And if the carrying capacity is exceeded, now you now have too much organism in a particular habitat. The first thing that will happen is the amount of resources available to them, will it be enough for them now? Not at all. There will now be stiff competition. And whenever there's competition, some organisms, don't forget, one of the effects, one of the consequences of competition is what? Death. Some organisms can begin to actually kill one another to eat. Even when they are fighting among themselves for those resources, some organisms will die. So let's look at the options. Option A, the population will grow exponentially. We know that's wrong because population will only grow exponentially if the current capacity is not exceeded and there is enough resources for them. Option B, the population will stabilize at a higher level. That's wrong as well. Option C, the population will decrease due to resource depletion. What the meaning of the resource depletion? Decrease in the amount of available resources. That is the correct answer here. And by the way, whenever there is competition among organisms of the same species, we call that kind of competition intra-species competition. Once again, the type of competition among organisms of the same species, intra-species. For example, let's look at the all here now. If there's anything, if there's any resources, maybe cold water, light, and so on and so forth, that you and I are competing among ourselves for, that kind of competition because human beings, we belong to the same species, Homo sapiens. That is intra-specific species. But any competition between organisms of different species, that is inter-specific competition. So, you take note of that. The next slide. Okay, which of the following is an example of amensalism? Now, we have different ecological associations, don't we? Let's start with the simple ones. Mutualism, also called symbiosis. An example, as a matter of fact, the definition of mutualism or symbiosis is a relationship between two organisms in which both of them benefit. You have an organism X and organism Y. They are in a relationship, a free relationship. X benefit Y, Y benefit X. That is symbiosis or mutualism. And also, you also have what we refer to as parasitism. That is an association between organisms in which one benefits and the other one is harmed. The one that benefits is the parasite. It can be endo, that is, it lives inside the host. It can be ecto, it lives outside. And the other one that is harmed is the host. For example, if you and I, if you are maybe like tapeworm in our body, the tapeworm are benefiting from the nutrients in that they get from the digestion that occurs in us. But we are the one that will be becoming leaner. All right, we'll be losing weight. We are going to be harmed. That is what the as parasitism, an association between two organisms in which one benefits. The one that benefits is called the parasite, and the other one is harmed. All right, and that one is called the host. And don't forget, we have both plant parasite and animal parasite. An example of parasite in animals are ectoparasite like tick, like lice, for example. Endoparasite like tapeworm, like guinea worm, and so on and so forth. We also have plant parasite. All right, we have parasitic plant like doda. We have parasitic plant like mistletoe. All right, so do take note of that. And a particular structure that is always present in parasitic plant is the presence of Ostoria. If you come across question asking you, does the presence of Ostoria in a plant shows that it is dash. Any plant that possesses Ostoria, it means such a plant is a parasitic plant. Not only that, we have commensalism. Commensalism is an association between two organisms in which one organism benefits and the other neither benefits nor loses. It means that only one of them benefits, but the other one, it is not harmed. It doesn't benefit, but it also does not lose. An example of that is the association between cattle and egrets. Another example is that way. Once again, commensalism is an association between two organisms in which one organism benefits and the other neither benefits nor loses. Three examples have been given so far. Number one, between cattle and egret. Number two, between shark and remora. Number three, between whale and barnacle. Alright? And number four, you can use between hermit crab and sea animal. Now, we also have examples of symbiosis, which I did not give earlier, we have the relationship between bees and flowers, for example. Bee will benefit by getting nectar from flower. The flower will benefit because the bee will help to pollinate the pollen grains, isn't it? And then, what about the bacteria, all right, in the large intestine of you and I? That bacteria help in producing a particular important vitamin in our body called vitamin K. And you know vitamin K is important for blood clotting, isn't it? So the bacteria in our large intestine called colon will benefit because it's going to feed on the waste product that is there. That's how it benefits. How do we benefit from them? They will help, the bacteria will help to produce vitamin K for us, which we can produce for ourselves. Another example of symbiosis is in leaching. Leaching is a symbiotic association between a fungus and an algae. An algae can photosynthesize, it has chlorophyll. So an algae can manufacture its own food. But an algae does not have roots that can use to absorb waters and minerals from the soil. So the fungi, which is heterotrophic and doesn't have any chlorophyll, the fungi will help the algae to absorb waters and minerals. The algae will now use the water and mineral to manufacture the food. Then the fungi now that cannot manufacture its own food will now benefit from the food that is prepared or produced by the algae. Another mycorrhiza is spelled like this: mycorrhiza. Mycorrhiza is a symbiotic association between a fungus and the root of a higher plant or flowering plant. Alright, so these are these. And not only that, we have amensalism. Amensalism is a relationship between two organisms in which one organism is harmed and the other one neither benefits nor loses. Let me give an example. If you have a big tree, all right, and that big tree provide a shade, and you now have smaller plants underneath them. Those plants, sooner or later, as a matter of fact, if you see big trees, under them, after some time, what happens? No plant grows there anymore. It becomes clear. Why? Because the big trees are form canopies. The branches will actually prevent light from the sun from getting to those plants under them. And these plants, they need the sunlight to photosynthesize to produce food for themselves. And when the big trees with their shade has actually prevented sunlight from reaching those small plants underneath them, the small plant die off, they will be harmed. And the big tree doesn't benefit or lose. That is the meaning of amensalism. So if you look at the answer, the correct answer here is option A. So amensalism is an association where a large tree providing shade for smaller plant. That particular shade will prevent the smaller plant from getting energy from the sun, from being able to photosynthesize. That is an example of amensalism. The next slide. Which of the following organism is an example of a secondary consumer? Now, in a food chain, we usually have minimum, we have maximum rather, of 5 or 6 trophic level. We have the first trophic level, that's what the producers are. Every food chain always starts with a producer. The first level producer, the consumers are always herbivores. You know what herbivores are? Organisms that feed on plants. So a herbivorous animal is always a primary consumer. All right. Whereas all these carnivores are always secondary consumers because they can feed on those primary consumers. So if you look at the options here, if you look at option a cow is a herbivore. It is a primary consumer, not a secondary consumer. If you look at a deer is also something that feeds on grasses. It is a primary consumer. And if you look at the correct answer here, which is going to be, which one do you think should be between lion and eagle? That's right, that's going to be lion. A lion can feed on cow. Any organism that feeds on a primary consumer is a secondary consumer. So you have cow, deer being primary consumer, and then you have lion, tiger, and so on and so forth being secondary consumer. Now, eagle is a tertiary consumer, all right? And then you also have scavengers. Scavengers are those things that feed on dead carcasses. So let's take note of this. The next slide. Next slide. Okay. What is the primary goal of conservation of natural resources? By the way, what is the meaning of conservation of natural resources? Conservation of natural resources is a judicious use of natural resources in order to ensure their continuous availability and to prevent some organism from going into extinction. So whenever you carry out conservation of natural resources, you are trying to prevent a decrease in that particular natural resource. You want to increase such natural resources. Let's look at option A, to increase the resources. Option B, to minimize the exploitation of resources. Option C, to increase industrial growth. And option D, to reduce pollution. The correct answer here is option B, to minimize the exploitation of resources. Because number one, not all resources can be increased. For example, there are some resources that are not renewable, isn't it? For example, if you're looking at maybe trees are renewable. Water is renewable. Wind is renewable. But what about coal? Is it renewable? It's not. What about petroleum? It's not renewable, so you cannot increase them. But at least you can minimize their exploitation. You can minimize the way at which they are extracted and used. All right. So the major aim of conservation, the primary goal of conservation is to minimize exploitation or wastage of natural resources. The correct answer here is option B. The next slide. Okay, the excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides can lead to that. Option A, soil fertility. Even though you might be tempted to choose that, that's wrong because you see fertilizer. The operative word is excessive. Those of you who do biology and agriculture, you know that when you use fertilizer excessively, what happens? It makes the soil to become acidic, isn't it? And you need to carry out what the battle as lining. Any soil that becomes acidic can no longer be fertile. So option A is wrong. Option B, conservation of water. There is no relationship between use of fertilizers and pesticides and conservation of water. Option C, which is the correct answer, water pollution. When you use fertilizer, when you add fertilizer to the soil, when you add pesticide to kill pests on the farm, sooner or later there will be rainfall, isn't it? Guess what happens when rainfall? It washes some of these fertilizers, some of these pesticides, Where does it carry them to? To water bodies, and then the water become polluted. So one of the major causes, or one of the major effects rather, of excessive usage of fertilizers and pesticides is water pollution. The next slide. Yeah. Okay. Let's. Yes. Now what? Oh, flocculation. Okay, all right. So somebody is asking, does is flocculation although the same thing as lining? All right, they are not. Lining is when you add all these basic or alkaline substances to the soil to reduce acidity in the soil. There are two major things that are used in lining. You add calcium oxide, CaO, to the soil to carry out liming, and you add calcium hydroxide, CaOH2. Flocculation, on the other hand, is used in chemistry under water purification. That's when you add alum to water in order to remove large particles. They also call it coagulation. So liming and flocculation are not the same thing. Liming is carried out when calcium oxide or calcium hydroxide is added to soil to neutralize the acidity. Flocculation, on the other hand, is not the same thing as that. So let's take a look at this. Which of the following is not a type of medicine? Now, medicines are those parts of a plant of highest rapid growth. Those parts of the plant where you have actively dividing cells that are rapid. As a matter of fact, medicines are defined region of fastest growth in plant. And we have three types of medicine. We have apical medicine, we have lateral medicine, we have intercalary medicine. So the correct answer here is obvious now. What is the correct answer now? That's the vascular medicine. So there is nothing like that. You have the apical medicine, you have the intercalary medicine, and then you have the lateral medicine. The next slide. Which of the following tissue types is dead at maturity? If you look at them, all of them are plant tissue. But the only one that is living when it is new, but dead when it matures is xylem tissue. Phloem is a living tissue. Parenchyma is a living tissue. Collenchyma is a living tissue. But when xylem becomes mature, they become dead. The only xylem tissue that remains living at maturity is xylem parenchyma. Where are they found? They are found in leaves of plants. All right, xylem parenchyma. They are the only xylem that remains alive or living at maturity. But the rest, majority of xylem at maturity, they are dead. And what is the function of xylem tissue? Xylem tissue helps in the absorption of water and minerals from the soil, isn't it? Not only that, it gives strength to the leaves, especially the parenchyma xylem or the xylem parenchyma. What about phloem? Phloem does only one thing, and that is translocation of manufactured food. Phloem helps in transporting manufactured food in the leaves to other parts of the plant. We call it translocation. Translocation is the movement of manufactured food from the leaf to all other parts of a plant. Not only that, we also have cambium. Cambium is another important part of a plant, and the function of cambium is secondary thickening. It's another very common question. They can ask you, which of the following plant tissue is concerned for secondary thickening? That is the increase in size of a tree as they grow. We now call it secondary thickening. That is cambium. All right, so please take note of that. And for collenchyma, collenchyma are those plant tissues that are unevenly thickened at the corners, and they give strength to young leaves and flowers. So please take note of that. So the correct answer here is xylem. Yeah. The agglutation. Okay. Translocation, agglutation. Okay. Yes. and sclerenchyma. Okay. All right. So two questions here. The first question is, what is the difference between cambium and sclerenchyma? They are completely different. Cambium is part of the vascular bundles of plants. Vascular bundles of plants are made up of just three parts: the xylem, the phloem, and the cambium. And I told you the function of cambium. Cambium is responsible for secondary thickening, period, increase in the size of plant. Now, sclerenchyma, on the other hand, is responsible for giving mechanical strength to plant to be able to withstand wind or breakage. Sclerenchyma is the plant tissue that contains the highest amount of lignin. Lignin is what gives sclerenchyma that high tensile strength so that plant can withstand wind during thunderstorm and rainfall and so on and so forth. I hope that is clear now. Somebody else was asking, what is the difference between translocation and mutation? Now, mutation is spelled like this. Now, I've defined translocation to you. Translocation is the process whereby manufactured food are transported from the leaves where they are formed to all other parts of the plant. And translocation occurs in the phloem vessel. But you see, glutation is one of the two ways in which water is lost by plants. One of the ways in which water is lost by plant is transpiration. Transpiration is the process whereby water is lost from plant in form of water vapor. All right. Now, if you wake up in the morning, most of the time, you notice that maybe rain fell over the night. There will be water. There will be droplets of water on leaf surfaces. But by the time sun comes up in the afternoon or evening, and the water still going to, the water still going to be there. No, they will have evaporated into the atmosphere. That is transpiration. All right. So, but another way in which water can be lost from plant, but this time around, not in terms of not in form of water vapor, but in terms of liquid itself is glutation. Now, if you ever stood under a tree, rain is not falling on a dry day like this, and you are standing under the tree, and then you notice that there is actually a drop of water consistently, maybe falling on you, or you notice a particular part under the tree is always wet due to continuous dropping of water. That is what we refer to as glutation. So loss of water in liquid state by plant is glutation. Loss of water in gaseous state in form of water vapor is transpiration. And the rate of transpiration in plant is measured by an instrument called a photometer. Is that understood? So that's for that. Okay, the next slide. No, let's go back. Okay, so which of the following is an adaptation of aquatic plants? Plants that are living in aquatic habitat. Number one, they don't need any long or strong roots. Because they are already living in water, they don't need to absorb water. What they need are two major things. They need broad leaves, all right, so that they can use that broad leaf to absorb as many sunlight as possible to photosynthesize. And not only that, they need air in them. The reason why they need air in them, in the leaves, is so that they can actually remain buoyant. What they mean buoyant? They can float in the water. So if you look at this, stick bar is an example of a characteristic of plant in desert, all right, or in savanna. Option B, wax coating on the leaves. That is also another characteristic of plants that are found in desert. 05. Stick bark, wax coating on the leaves, they are adaptation to prevent loss of water. And an aquatic organism does not need to bother about losing water. The correct answer is option C, broad and flat leaves. Why do they need broad and flat leaves? Number one, it will enable them to float on water. And number two, they will be able to use that to absorb as many as possible amount of sunlight for synthesis. They don't need strong roots. What do they need strong roots for? Is it to absorb water? They're already in aquatic habitat, so they don't need that. So what they need is number one, flat leaves to be able to float and then absorb enough sunlight for photosynthesis. Then they need air spaces.
Polar region. So hibernation is wrong here. Hibernation is an adaptation technique exhibited by organisms during extreme cold weather conditions. They remain inactive to be able to withstand and survive in cold weather conditions. So that's not applicable here. Tick 4. They don't need tick 4 here, alright? Because they are not trying to conserve heat. Organisms that need tick 4 are organisms like polar bears that live in Arctic or tundra region where there is extreme amount of heat. They need tick 4 to be able to prevent excessive loss of heat from their body, not desert animal. The correct answer, option C, nocturnal behavior. Because let's leave that option, the correct option. Let's come to option D, high path story. It is animals that are living in polar region, in cold region, that need to have high path storage. Why? Because fat is an insulating material. It will prevent loss of heat from them. That is why whale always have blubber, B-L-U-B-B-E-R. It's a layer of fat that are stored in whale to prevent the whale from losing excessive amount of heat. But the correct answer here is option C, nocturnal behavior. What does it mean? Nocturnal animals are those animals that are active during the night. Why do desert animals, why do they need to exhibit nocturnal behavior? Because if they go out during the day, if they are moving around and active during the day, what do you think will happen? Majority of the water in their body, what happens? It evaporates, they lose it. So they remain inactive during the day, and then in the night,
Is nocturnal behavior, remaining active only during the night by avoiding sunlight during the day. The next one, next slide. Okay, which of the following is a major threat to terrestrial habitat worldwide? Option A, deforestation. Of course, deforestation is a major threat to terrestrial habitat worldwide. People, due to urbanization, alright, that's another one. Due to urbanization, trees. Where there are trees before, they are cutting out the trees, houses, companies, and so on and so forth are being built there. So deforestation is a threat to terrestrial habitat. So also is urbanization as a particular town or a region becomes more urbanized, more trees More areas that are either to be maybe habitat of other animals, you clear them for building and other industrial materials. And not only that, climate change. Due to climate, rains are no longer falling as much as they used to. And because of that, a lot of trees are actually dying and going into extinction. So deforestation is a threat, urbanization is a threat, climate change is a threat. So the correct answer here is all of the above. Deforestation, urbanization, climate change, they are all threats to terrestrial habitat. If you guys can access, there are places that were once covered with plants and trees, and there are a lot of animals there. But now, if you go there, houses have sprung up everywhere. Those trees have actually been uprooted, cut away. The animals there have either been chased away or killed. That is a threat to terrestrial habitat. So the next question, what is the primary function of auxins in plants? Don't forget, auxin is the most important plant hormone. Even though we have six common plant hormones, the most important of them is auxin. What does auxin? What does it do? A lot of things. Number one, auxin is responsible for cell elongation. Now listen to me, not cell elongation. Because the plant hormone responsible for cell elongation is gibberellin, but the plant hormone responsible for cell elongation is auxin. The hormone responsible also for tropism, like hydrotropism, phototropism, and so on and so forth, is also auxin. We also use auxin in agriculture for weed control. High concentration of auxin can be applied to plants and it will kill such plants. So if you take a look at the option here, the correct answer is option C, to promote cell elongation. Please remember, there is a difference between cell elongation, cell elongation. The hormone that promotes cell elongation, that makes a short plant to grow tall, is gibberellin. But the hormone that makes a cell that is tiny to grow taller, cell elongation, is auxin. Don't forget, we also have acetic acid. Acetic acid is responsible for falling of leaf. It inhibits growing. It actually simulates all these hibernation in fruits and falling of leaves. We also have ethene or ethylene. The function of ethene or ethylene is to stimulate or to hasten ripening of fruits. And we also have cytokinin, which helps or aids cell division. So please, let's take note of that. The correct answer for number 21 is to hasten or to promote cell elongation. Okay, the next one. Which plant hormone is responsible, is associated rather with the response to stress such as drought, that is the acetic acid? What happens when rain is now falling? What do you notice in trees? What happens to their leaves? They begin to fall. Which hormone is responsible for falling of leaves, which I just mentioned a while ago? Acetic acid. Don't forget, it is this same acetic acid that is responsible for opening and closing of stomata. Please take note of that. The hormone responsible, the plant hormone responsible for opening and closing of stomata is acetic acid. So, acetic acid is involved in falling of leaves. It always encourages, it induces dormancy in seed, whereas auxin and gibberellin will inhibit dormancy. All right. So the correct answer here is option A. The next slide. Which hormone regulates the body's metabolism by increasing the metabolic rate? That is simply thyroxine. The hormone
If blood is too dilute, it has too much water in our blood, the particular hormone that will stimulate the nephron to remove excess water from their body to produce dilute urine. And if there is too and if the amount of water in our blood is too low, that is, if you are dehydrated, this same hormone will send information to the kidney so that less water is lost with the urine. Which hormone am I talking about? The antidiuretic hormone, and it's also called vasopressin. So the hormone that regulates the water balance in the body is antidiuretic hormone,
otherwise called vasopressin. If you look at option D, which I have not explained before, oxytocin. Oxytocin plays important role, especially in women during labor. Oxytocin is responsible for the contraction of the uterus so that the fetus, the child, can actually be expelled. So the correct answer here is vasopressin. Don't forget, the kidney perform the same function as contractile vacuole in unicellular organism. Contractile vacuole will remove excess water in unicellular organism like amoeba, while in you and I as mammals, our kidney will help to remove this excess water. Not only that, the functional unit of the kidney is called nephron, alright? And the organ that carries urine from the kidney to the bladder is called ureter. And the part of the nephron where concentration of urine takes place is called loop of Henle. Once again, the part of the ureter, the part of the nephron where concentration of urine occurs is loop of Henle, while the part of the nephron where ultrafiltration occurs is the Bowman's capsule, and the part of the nephron where selective reabsorption of substances occur is called the convoluted tubules. Both the proximal convoluted tubules and the distal convoluted